So, picture this. What if you could try to save Western civilization with a set of books? Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a movie. But back in the mid-20th century, this was a very real and incredibly ambitious plan. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the year is 1952. The world's still recovering from a devastating war, we're entering the atomic age, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the air. It's right then that a team at Encyclopedia Britannica launches a project that is, honestly, just breathtaking in its ambition. They called it the Great Books of the Western World.
I mean, the sheer scale of this thing is kind of hard to wrap your head around. They essentially tried to curate the entire intellectual heritage of the West and put it into one single collection. We're talking 74 of the most influential authors ever, 443 of their most important works, and not just little snippets, the full texts, covering 2,500 years of thinking, all packed into 54 volumes.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just about building a fancy, impressive bookshelf. This was meant to be a rescue mission. The people behind it were convinced that something vital, something essential was being lost. Which leads to the big question. Why on earth would they go to all this trouble?
So why do it? Well, before we can really get the answer, we have to appreciate exactly what it was they built. It was, and this is no exaggeration, a complete library in a box.
Just look at the timeline this thing covers. It's incredible. You start all the way back in ancient Greece with the foundational voices of Homer, Plato, and Aristotle. Then you move right through the Roman Empire with Virgil and Tacitus, into the Middle Ages with Augustine and Dante. You hit the Enlightenment with giants like Newton and Locke, and you go all the way up to the modern world with Darwin, Marx, and Freud. It's a continuous conversation across centuries. 443. That number is so important because it gets to a core belief of the whole project. You had to let these great minds speak for themselves in their own words at full length. No summaries, no Cliff's Notes. The idea was that you, the reader, weren't just a student getting a lecture, you were being invited to the table to hear the argument and judge it for yourself. And the 74 authors? They weren't just a greatest hits list. Each one was picked because their work speaks to the others. They argue with each other, they build on each other's ideas, they even flat out contradict each other. It's that back and forth that creates the real magic, this dynamic dialogue that echoes through time.
So that's the what, but the why is where this story gets really fascinating. Because this whole project was a direct and pretty fiery response to what they saw as a major crisis in education and in the culture itself. Just listen to the words of the editor-in-chief, Robert Hutchins. The headlong plunge into the abyss. Whoa, that's not just marketing copy, right? He was sounding a serious alarm. He genuinely felt that the modern world was cutting people off from their own intellectual inheritance.
For Hutchins, the problem came down to a huge shift in what people thought education was for. He contrasted the old ideal, liberal education, which was all about pursuing excellence and understanding the big questions in life, with what he saw as modern education, which he felt was becoming all about just getting a job and fitting in. He argued that this new way treated people like tools, like means to an end, not as free human beings.
So if civilization was taking a plunge into the abyss, what was their solution? Well, it was an idea that was both incredibly simple and deeply profound. They wanted us to rejoin the great conversation.
This was their big idea, the beating heart of the whole project, the great conversation. It's this ongoing dialogue about the biggest questions we can ask. What is justice? What does it mean to live a good life? What is truth anyway? They argued that the ultimate goal of a society should be to become a civilization of the dialogue, where no idea is off limits and everything can be discussed. Now, this is really important. This wasn't about turning back the clock or escaping into the past. Not at all. The point was to grab all that wisdom and use it to tackle the problems of right now. As Hutchins said, they wanted these voices heard again because, quote, they may help us to learn to live better now. Now, of course, the editors were smart. They knew a project this big would get some pushback, so they decided to tackle the biggest criticisms head-on, right in the very first volume. First up, the most obvious objection, right? In our modern, scientific, fast-paced world, what could these ancient books possibly have to say to us?
And their answer was, frankly, brilliant. They said that just because our technology has progressed doesn't mean our fundamental human problems have changed. We still struggle with the same big questions about life, justice, and community. Technology changes our tools, sure, but it doesn't change what it means to be human. Okay, so maybe the books are timeless, but that brought up another tricky question: elitism. I mean, historically, this kind of classical education was only for the rich and powerful. Is it really something for everybody? Should it be?
Their answer was a resounding, passionate yes.
They basically said that a democracy depends on this kind of education for all its citizens. They believe that giving people political power without the education to think critically was just plain dangerous. And besides, as they pointed out, how can you ever say people aren't capable of it if you never even give them the chance to try?
All right, so that left one last huge objection for the 20th century mind. What about science? Doesn't the constant forward march of scientific discovery just make all this old thinking obsolete?
Far from seeing science as the enemy, they saw it as a vital player in the great conversation. The set is loaded with the masterworks of science, from Copernicus and Galileo to Newton and Darwin. They believed that reading these original works was the best way to understand science, not as some kind of magic, but as a human endeavor, a key part of our long search for knowledge.
So, once you see how they answered all these objections, you start to see their ultimate goal. And it went way beyond just helping one person read a few books. They were dreaming of creating a whole new kind of global community.
They laid out a kind of path. It starts simply. You read the books. That reading lets you join this incredible, timeless conversation. By taking part in that dialogue, you develop real intellectual independence, the ability to think for yourself. And the final amazing step, you become a citizen of what they called the World Republic of Learning, a community united not by flags or borders, but by a shared love for wisdom.
It was such a hopeful vision, especially for a world that felt like it was on the brink. A powerful belief that the best defense any nation has is the mind and character of its people. And that really leaves us with a question, doesn't it? If their huge project was an attempt to restart the great conversation for their time, what is the great conversation that we need to be having today?